What if the silence you keep avoiding is exactly the place where God speaks to you the most? Think about that for a few seconds, not as a pretty phrase or a distant idea, but as a real, direct, almost uncomfortable question. Because for many people, silence doesn't bring peace. It brings discomfort. When everything gets too quiet, something inside starts to move. Thoughts surface. Feelings arise. Questions that were hidden start knocking on the door. We live in a world that never stops. Sounds, notifications, opinions, short videos, messages arriving non-stop. There's always something pulling at your attention, demanding an immediate response, requiring a reaction. And maybe that's why silence has almost become an enemy, something that feels empty, useless, even threatening. But what if silence isn't absence? What if it's presence? Throughout history, especially in the Christian tradition, silence was never treated as escape. Quite the opposite. Jesus, in several decisive moments, chose to withdraw. He stepped away from the crowds, went up the mountain, entered the wilderness, not to hide from the world, but to realign before returning to it. Before choosing the disciples, silence. Before facing the cross, silence. Before teaching, healing, deciding, he created space. Inner space. Spiritual space. Space to hear what doesn't shout. That says a lot, because if even Jesus, fully aware of his purpose, sought silence, then maybe silence isn't a luxury. Maybe it's a deep human necessity. Today, even surrounded by voices, many people feel lost. We've never had so much information, and yet so little clarity. People know what everyone else thinks, but no longer know what they themselves feel. They know what's trending, but don't know where they're going. In this context, silence appears as something simple, almost forgotten, yet extremely powerful, not as something mystical or detached from reality, but as an inner guide, a place where confusion starts to organize itself, where excess dissolves, where truth slowly becomes audible. This video isn't an invitation to isolate yourself from the world or abandon your responsibilities. It's an invitation to something more subtle, and at the same time, deeper, learning to create space. Because when everything is too loud, even the voice that truly matters gets drowned out. And if this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might also be needing silence right now. Sometimes all someone needs is to hear this at the right moment. Throughout this video, we're going to walk through simple but deep ideas, common human experiences, moments where silence stops being empty and starts becoming direction. And maybe, along the way, you'll notice something important. Jesus never chased answers. He always created space to hear them. There's a very quiet idea that has slowly settled into the way we live, almost without us noticing. The idea that if we're always moving, we're making progress. That if everything is urgent, then everything is important. The modern world taught us to confuse noise with relevance, speed with purpose, visibility with value. From an early age, we are trained to react, to respond quickly, to have an opinion about everything, to keep up with everything. If you stay silent for too long, it feels like you're falling behind. If you don't post, don't comment, don't take a stance, there's a sense of becoming invisible. And little by little, external noise turns into internal noise. Social media isn't the problem in itself. Information isn't the problem. The problem begins when there's no pause between one stimulus and the next. When the mind has no space to digest, reflect, or feel. When identity starts being built more through comparison than through awareness. We start the day already behind, wake up checking our phones, go to sleep exhausted, but with a racing mind, surrounded by opinions, yet increasingly distant from our own voice. And in this rhythm, something essential gets lost: inner connection. There's a phrase that crosses both philosophy and spirituality and fits perfectly here. When everything is urgent, nothing is essential. Because what's essential doesn't shout, it doesn't compete for attention, it waits to be heard. The result of all this noise is a kind of exhaustion that rest doesn't fix. Emotional and spiritual burnout, people tired without knowing exactly why, dissatisfied without knowing exactly with what, lost even while following all the steps they were told would work. And here, the contrast with Jesus becomes even clearer. While the world around him projected expectations, demanded signs, and pushed for quick answers, he did the opposite. He withdrew, went up the mountain, walked into solitary places, not because he rejected people, but because he knew that without silence, even the clearest mission gets distorted. Silence, for Jesus, was never escape. It was preparation. In the wilderness, there were no applause, no external validation, just what was essential, just truth, stripped of distractions. And that's exactly what the noise of the world tries to prevent, because in silence, masks fall, comparisons lose strength, false urgencies reveal themselves as distractions. Many inner crises don't arise because there are no answers. They arise because there are too many answers, coming from all directions. Advice, opinions, expectations, standards, everything at once, everything shouting, everything demanding that you be something, do something, prove something. And in the middle of all that, who you are gets pushed aside. Constant noise creates an illusion of control. It feels like if you stay on top of everything, you won't mess up. Like if you listen to every voice, you'll find the right path. But in reality, it only increases confusion, because the more noise there is, the less discernment remains. Jesus understood something that today seems almost forgotten. Deep decisions don't come from chaos. They come from clarity, and clarity requires silence. It's no coincidence that whenever something important was about to happen, he withdrew, as if he were teaching us, without long speeches, that listening comes before acting, that alignment comes before movement. The world says, do more, say more, show more. Silence says, observe, wait, feel, listen. And maybe the reason so many people feel disconnected isn't a lack of faith or effort or ability. Maybe it's simply a lack of inner space. A space that's been filled with noise, urgency, and expectations that were never truly theirs. Inner disconnection doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. It starts when you ignore small signals, when you stop listening to that strange feeling in your chest, when you answer before reflecting, when you agree before feeling, when you follow a path just because everyone else is on it. Silence threatens this way of living because it interrupts the automatic flow. It creates a pause where you're forced to meet yourself, and that's scary, not silence itself, but what it might reveal. And maybe the greatest fear human beings have isn't noise, but what silence shows. If silence makes you uncomfortable, that's not a problem, it's a sign that something inside is asking for attention. Because silence, contrary to what many think, doesn't create conflicts. It simply removes the distractions that were hiding what was already there. And that's exactly why so many people do everything they can to avoid it. When everything gets quiet, the thoughts that were pushed under the rug start to surface. Doubts that never had space to exist gain room. Guilt, fear, insecurity, unanswered questions. Silence works like a mirror. It doesn't distort, it doesn't invent, it simply reflects. Many people think silence will bring ready-made answers, almost like an external voice telling them what to do. But that's not how it works. Silence reveals first. It reveals what's misaligned, what's being avoided, what's been muted by excess noise. And that's uncomfortable, because it demands honesty. It requires stopping. It requires looking inward without filters. We live in a culture that encourages constant distraction precisely because it protects us from this encounter. As long as we're busy, we don't have to feel. As long as we're reacting, we don't have to reflect. As long as there's noise, silence doesn't get a chance to speak, but there's something profound here. What you avoid in silence is often what most needs to be heard. Philosophies of self-knowledge have always pointed to this. There's no clarity without observation, no maturity without inner confrontation, and inner confrontation doesn't happen in noise. It happens when there's nowhere to run. In Christian spirituality, this is very clear. Jesus never promised a life without inner conflict. He showed a path of awareness, a path where truth sets you free, but before it frees you, it reveals. Gethsemane is perhaps the clearest example. Before the cross, before physical pain, there was silence, a heavy silence, a conscious silence. Jesus withdraws, prays, feels anguish, feels fear. There's no audience, no speeches, just presence, just truth. In that silence, there was no confusion about what needed to be done. There was pain, but there was clarity. There was weight, but there was alignment. Silence didn't remove fear. It separated fear from mission. That distinction matters. Silence doesn't eliminate difficult emotions. It organizes them. It shows what is reaction and what is direction, what is wounded ego and what is inner calling, what is noise and what is faith. Many people say they can't hear their intuition or discern what they truly feel, but they rarely create space for it. They want immediate answers, but can't tolerate the process of listening. In silence, patterns begin to appear. Thoughts that repeat themselves, fears that show up in the same moments, desires that emerge when no one is watching. And this isn't to condemn you, it's to reveal you. Jesus never used silence to judge. He used it to align. There's a deep difference between guilt and awareness. Guilt paralyzes. Awareness directs. Silence, when understood correctly, doesn't push you into guilt. It leads you into clarity. That's why it scares people, because it removes excuses. It removes the noise that justified wrong choices. It removes the excess that hid simple truth. And when that truth appears, a choice emerges. Keep running or start listening. Silence also separates fear from intuition. Fear shouts. Intuition whispers. Ego demands. Truth invites. Faith doesn't pressure, it guides. But to hear a whisper, the room has to be quiet. Many mistakes don't happen because of a lack of intelligence or faith. They happen because decisions are made in emotional noise. When people are reacting, not listening. When they're trying to prove something, not feeling. Silence doesn't bring magical answers. It brings honesty. And honesty, when welcomed, starts pointing the way. Because silence doesn't just reveal wounds, it also points to paths, and that's what almost no one learns to hear. There's a subtle but profound difference between observing and judging. Judgment pressures. Observation simply notices. Judgment demands immediate answers. Observation just sees, and silence, when lived well, occupies exactly that space. It observes. Silence doesn't call you weak. It doesn't point fingers. It doesn't create stories of condemnation. It simply shows what is, no labels, no drama, and that's why it can be so transformative. Think of something simple. When water is agitated, it reflects nothing clearly. You look and see distortion, ripples, confusion. But when the water becomes still, it turns into a mirror. Not because what's in front of it changed, but because it stopped moving unnecessarily. The mind works the same way. When we're agitated, reacting constantly, everything feels confusing. Emotions blend together. Decisions get blurry. We get lost in justifications. But when there is silence, not to escape, but to observe, things begin to organize themselves. Jesus taught this in a practical way, without complicated speeches. Before speaking, he listened. Before acting, he observed. Before pointing out the speck, he invited reflection on the beam, not as condemnation, but as awareness. Silence creates space for you to see what's truly yours and what was placed on you. Family expectations, social pressure, inherited fears, dreams that weren't born in you, but that you started carrying anyway. In noise, all of this blends together. In silence, it begins to separate, and this doesn't happen violently. Clarity doesn't arrive as a shock. It comes as a calm understanding, a sense of this fits or this isn't mine. Subtle but firm. Silence doesn't issue commands. It doesn't say, do this now. It shows direction, and direction is different from imposition. Direction respects timing, it respects process, it respects the maturity of the one who listens. Jesus never forced anyone to follow him. He invited, walked, observed. Silence carries the same language. It doesn't force. It invites awareness. When you allow this space, something interesting happens. Excessive self-criticism starts to fade. Because you stop attacking yourself and start understanding yourself, inner judgment loses strength and conscious responsibility takes its place. You begin to realize that many conflicts weren't about right or wrong, but about misalignment, about living on autopilot, about responding to external expectations without consulting your own truth. Silence reveals this gently, without guilt, without fear. It teaches you to observe thoughts without identifying with all of them, to feel emotions without being ruled by them, to notice impulses without acting on them immediately. This kind of observation creates spiritual maturity, not a performative spirituality, but a lived one, where faith isn't shouting, it's listening, where trust isn't rush, it's clarity. In silence, you start to distinguish anxiety from alertness, neediness from genuine desire, disguised fear from true intuition. And little by little, life becomes simpler. Not easier, but clearer, because clarity reduces unnecessary conflict. Silence doesn't judge you, it shows you. And when you see honestly, the path starts to form on its own. All of this may sound deep, beautiful, even inspiring, but silence only becomes a true guide when it leaves the realm of ideas and enters practical life. When it starts being used in simple, ordinary moments, where decisions actually shape your path. Silence doesn't require isolation. It asks for conscious pause, before replying to that message that triggered a strong reaction, before accepting an invitation you're unsure about, before entering a difficult conversation, before making a decision that seems small, but you know carries weight. It's in these moments that silence acts as a guide. It's not about hours of meditation. Sometimes it's just a few seconds, a deeper breath, a space between impulse and action, a moment where you choose not to react automatically. In daily life, this changes everything. Before responding in the heat of emotion, silence shows whether that response comes from fear or truth. Before saying yes, it reveals whether it's availability or neediness. Before saying no, it shows whether it's a boundary or avoidance. Jesus lived this simply and consistently. He didn't react to provocation. He didn't rush to please. He didn't move according to pressure. There was always a pause, always presence. Used this way, silence becomes a filter. It doesn't decide for you, but it clears the path so your decision can be conscious. The problem is that most people only seek silence after they've already made mistakes, when Jesus taught us to use it before. Most painful decisions aren't born from malice or lack of character. They're born from haste, from impulse. from inner noise that demands an immediate answer even when everything inside is still unclear. When the mind is full, any direction feels better than stopping. That's why so many important choices are made at emotional peaks. A yes to please, a no out of fear. A drastic change made in exhaustion, a breakup decided in anger. Later, time brings a quiet question. Why did I do that? Inner noise creates a false sense of urgency. It says that if you don't decide now, you'll lose something, that the moment will pass, that the opportunity won't return, and under that pressure, clarity disappears. Jesus never decided that way. Before important choices, he withdrew, created distance from chaos, not to avoid responsibility, but to avoid being led by it. Silence always came before action. This reveals something deep. Aligned decisions aren't born from desperation, but from listening. How many times have you felt a clear sense about something and ignored it? Not because you didn't understand, but because you didn't create enough space to hear it fully. The answer came as discomfort, restlessness, a sense that this doesn't feel right. But the noise spoke louder. Silence doesn't speed up decisions, it aligns them, and alignment often requires slowing down, accepting that not every answer comes on the timeline of anxiety. Some come on the timeline of maturity. When you decide in noise, you may get it right sometimes, but you live in conflict. When you decide in silence, even hard decisions carry peace. Not immediate comfort, but inner coherence. Destiny isn't mystical or distant. It's built through small, repeated choices, and those choices are deeply influenced by the inner state from which they're made. Silence doesn't change the external world. It changes the place from which you choose. Jesus didn't look for shortcuts. He looked for alignment, and alignment almost always begins away from noise. Maybe you've already received more answers than you realize. Maybe the issue was never lack of direction, but lack of silence to notice it. At the beginning, the question was simple but deep. What if the silence you avoid is exactly where God speaks to you the most? After everything said, that question may sound different now, not abstract or distant, but like a real invitation, an invitation to see silence not as emptiness, but as encounter. The world won't stop. Voices won't quiet down, opinions will keep coming, notifications will keep buzzing, expectations will keep pressing. Noise is part of external life, but the guide never shouts. It doesn't compete for attention. It doesn't impose itself. It reveals itself when there is space. Jesus understood this deeply. He didn't chase noise. He wasn't driven by the urgency of crowds. He walked towards silence, and from there, he returned with clarity, direction, and presence. Silence isn't the absence of God. It's closeness. It's not withdrawal from life. It's alignment with it. It's not wasted time. It's gained awareness. Maybe the answer you're looking for won't come after this video. Maybe it won't arrive as a sentence or an extraordinary sign. Maybe it will come in the first moment of silence you allow today. The first real pause, the first moment when you don't fill the space with distraction, and that takes courage. Courage to hear what's already there, courage to feel without running, courage to trust that clarity isn't born from excess, but from presence. The world will keep shouting, but the guide never shouts. Jesus didn't chase noise. He walked towards silence. If this video spoke to you, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment sharing what silence has already shown you, and share it with someone who needs to hear this right now. Sometimes a reflection like this arrives at exactly the right moment. And now, one last question, not to answer here, but to feel honestly. What has silence been trying to tell you lately?